There was once a time that I did strategic workforce planning internally, and I was entirely self-taught, muddled through, read some things, tried to make it work. So kind of the pain, scars that you're developing going through, I've been there, I have walked those pathways. But it was through doing it and testing it and going, well, these things don't work, and finding ways that did work for me that I created what is now Agile Workforce Planning. And that it really came about because, people were saying, well, actually, what you're doing over here makes sense. And so I ended up talking more about it and got traction with it. At the time that I created it, I didn't realize I was actually onto something. It was just something that was working, that it was working for me and making a difference to what I was able to do in organizations. But for the past 4 years, I've now been a consultant in it, because now I get to do this in lots of different organizations, lots of different sizes, lots of different organizational challenges, and all I do is workforce planning, and that's the thing that I love doing. So I want to introduce what I mean by this thing, Agile Workforce Planning. You'll see from the size of it, it's quite hefty. If dropped from a decent height, it would kill a small animal. There's a lot in there. So I'm going to talk through two things. Firstly, what is this thing that we call workforce planning? And then I'll get into the specifics of this fun bit of Agile Workforce Planning. What is it? Everyone's talked about this concept of, right people, right place, right time. That's kind of what I was brought up in the the early days of trying to work out what it was to be a workforce planning kind of person. And I realised that actually we're probably just focusing on a couple of things there, that there's a lot of other dimensions that matter. The thing that is really important, and Gemma was alluding to this, is this concept right at the centre that we call capability, the right capability. I'll talk more about it in a short while, and skills is a key part of that. But I tend not to think about this concept of like a human in isolation, the right person, because everyone exists within this context of an organisation, and it's one of those interesting things that when you think about capability is capability doesn't exist outside there on the street. Capability only exists within the context of an organisation. I'll go and talk a bit more about why that is. But when we talk about this, we're talking about right workforce. And when we talk about right workforce, the right workforce is all of these 7 rights. So right capability is at the centre. But we've got right size, because there is a number element to there, but it's not the only dimension. There's a lot of others. So right size, it's about the numbers. Probably need this up here, don't you? I told you this wouldn't work. So right size is when we talk about the numbers. The right location, clearly geography is going to play a part. But we're also talking about things within the organisational structure. So great if you've got someone who is some sort of coding ninja. Very difficult to get value out of them if they are sat on a checkout not doing coding related things. So location within the structure as well as geographical location. The right time at the point in time that you need it quite clearly, but also for the duration that you need it. When I see people doing workforce planning, often they remember the first bit and forget about the second bit, and then you've got them when you need it, and then someone else wants to steal them just weeks later. You've got right cost. So you can clearly recognise this as the financial cost of doing these things, but there is also the opportunity cost that, again, a lot of people forget about. So, this is about the different choices that you can make. What's also really important, and Gemma gives a really great example of what this looks like, is what's the external cost. And clearly there's the other side of it, of what's the external benefit. We've got to remember that as organisations, the part that they play within society is absolutely massive. I've seen from when I was growing up, I saw firsthand the impact of organisations taking decisions and what they would do that devastated a local community. We've all experienced that, and therefore cost is that dimension of cost is a key component. You've then also got right risk. That's something that you tie quite closely in with that opportunity cost. Every decision that you take is all about business risk. This is about a balance of business risk. We talk about bridging the gap between supply and demand. But I've not yet met an organisation who can do this in a perfect way, nor is that necessary. It is not necessary that in every single gap, at every single point in time from now until the end of time that happens. It is all about managing that risk from an organisational perspective. Of course you could bridge all the gaps, but the cost of that might be more than makes sense. And then the final bit is right shape. And you would think about this as the structures within the organisations. But this is when you will also think about what are the more cultural dimensions of the organisation. So what is your balance of male to female, for example, within an organisation? What is your balance of managers to staff? What's your balance of one part of an organisation to another part of an organisation? So when we say we need the right workforce, it is the right workforce across these different dimensions, but critically to deliver the desired business outcomes. We're not doing this for funsies. This is all about what is going to deliver business impact. And which is why when I talk about workforce planning, oddly, the aim of workforce planning is not creating the workforce plan. The point of workforce planning is to create the workforce. The plan is the mechanism that gets you there. It is the guide rails that get you there. But never lose sight that the point of the workforce plan is that the point of workforce planning is an activity to create the right workforce, not an activity simply to create a plan for a bit of a laugh or to create something that is some glossy document that goes on a shelf. So that's what we talk about when we say what is workforce planning, and it happens across 3 different dimensions. The first is that of resource management. So people will talk about workforce planning as if it is this sort of one great homogenous thing, and they say, well, we've just done workforce planning, so I don't know what this workforce planning is we're talking about over here. There's different things. So the first dimension is your resource management. Quick show of hands, who manages a team? Okay, when one of your team's off sick and you work out who's going to be covering what, that is resource management. Now, in a lot of bigger organisations, particularly when they are doing things that where you require people in specific locations, specific points in time. So you think about supermarkets, you think about manufacturing that works on a shift basis, you think about telephony. Then you're probably going to have a central function who's going to be doing this kind of activity as well. The next bit is operational planning. So that's the sort of the next time period. This is when you're looking out the next financial year. This is what finance does. The finance function does this, and in some organisations, but not all of them, finance might allow HR to get tangentially involved in this. But for a lot of organisations, this is run as a finance activity. That bit where we focus purely on heads and costs. But if you're doing this right, you can start to get things in the right direction. But that typically is what it ends up being focused on. And you're talking about what is that optimal mix that you need. You're still talking about, if you think about it from this way of doing it, when you've got this short term and medium term and then into the long term where you're thinking about strategic. Over here, you're probably talking about names. It's Jane. Over here, you're probably talking about groups of people. But over here, if you're still talking about that kind of language, you might have missed the point, because it's at that point when you're thinking longer term, when you start thinking about what are the capabilities that we need to deliver the long term. And that's often the clue. If you're thinking you're having a strategic conversation and you're talking about Jane, you're probably not. So that's what workforce planning is. And the thing about Agile Workforce Planning is Agile Workforce Planning are designed to look across each of these different dimensions. There's a lot of strengths to doing each of these, but often the thing that you see happen is an organisation comes up with a fantastic multi-year plan, but it doesn't connect into the way that work is done right now. And that's just going to upset people. So we come up with this way of doing this across multiple dimensions to ensure that you know the island that you're sailing to, but that you're able to Adjust the sail and adjust the rudder as the waves hit and the winds change. That's what all of this is about. So let's talk about how you do it. You won't get quizzed. So, 6-stage approach. Baseline, supply, demand, gap analysis, action plan, and deliver. If I've set up my animations correct, this won't embarrass me. Yes. Okay, so the first part of this is baselining. Now, we're talking about, almost the how do you start some of this. You've got to have people who are interested in you doing this. So you've got to have stakeholders who are willing to let you go off and spend time doing this activity. So you need to have people who are going to back you. Having done workforce planning a lot, the actual act of workforce planning, particularly the data-related stuff, it's not too difficult. The bit that is the most difficult is the stakeholder element within this. The people who will derail your attempts to do strategic workforce planning are the stakeholders who either don't believe it or have a vested interest in protecting their element of the workforce that your work might start to impact on. So you've got to engage your stakeholders. You've got to understand the strategy. So when I talk about this is about delivering business outcomes, your starting point is what is the organisation trying to achieve. You're almost doing that Delphi style, know thyself, but you're doing it for your business. And then the final bit that you're doing is on workforce segmentation. I won't steal too many sandwiches from this because this is the activity that you'll be doing later, but we talked about that. Well, where do you start? And if you've not got an obvious problem area that you think we need to start with, then doing some form of workforce segmentation to work out an area of focus is a great way of doing it. But if you've not done workforce planning before, or you've got an organisation that's got really low maturity, then it's probably best not to make your first attempt at workforce planning do the whole organisation. Because it's going to take a long time. People get upset by it. And the thing is, and again, this comes back to the stakeholder element, is it's just going to take longer so that people don't see the value coming out and then they go, well, what is this that's going to be created? Whereas if you can start small, focus on an area that is a problem area that if you could fix it, people would stand up and take note. That's the place to go. Then you're looking at supply. So this is where you're looking at what is the workforce I have today and how is that going to change over time. You're pulling out all the people data that as an HR function you've got loads of, so that should all be easy. People often ask me about this data element. But our data's a mess, don't worry. I've done this in organisations where their data is an absolute mess, and I've done it in organisations where, regardless of the quality of the data, I didn't actually need to touch their data. Go with what you've got and start making decisions on the basis of that. Remember this, when you're talking about things over multi-years, remember, we're not talking about Jane at this point in time, so you're not going to impact Jane and what's going to happen to her tomorrow when you're thinking about these things in the long term. So don't get too wrapped around the axle about the quality of your data. But this is the element that we're thinking about when we talk about this workforce. Because I said that right capability is at the core of this. Because you've got what is the capability that you have today, and the right capability is the capability that you need. So the 6 components of capability, the first is skills. So these are things that we have practiced and that we can do. All capabilities create some form of outcome. So the skills is what we practice, what we can do. Think about from a footballing perspective, I practiced, I can do this kind of thing. So the skills are then different from knowledge. This is something that we have learnt and therefore something that is front of mind for us. Hence, the learning and the development. We develop skills, we learn knowledge. But this last bit is what's readily available in our minds is an absolutely key component of it. Many years ago, I got myself a B grade in French. And my French is appalling, which is even worse when you consider that some of my family are French and live in France. But my level of French is very much Monge to Rodney. But I've got a GCSE grade B that says I can do this. I've learnt it, it's not readily available in my mind, so it isn't knowledge. But we'll come on to that little dimension in a second. So you've got your skills, you've got your knowledge. Then you've got your mindset. This is how I think about things, how I feel about things, and how I react to things. So I've got the skills, I've got the knowledge, so why can't I do the thing? We've encountered this lots. We've got this hire who could do those things, but why isn't it? Often it comes down to mindsets, how we think about things, how we feel about things, how we trip over things, how we react to things. The mindset is a thing that can then start to either elevate or negate the effects of the skills and knowledge. Physiology does this in a very similar way. So physiology, think about your intelligence, so that is something that you've got which is going to impact your ability to develop knowledge and to develop skills. It's your physical appearance, because you think some jobs are going to be on a manual basis and therefore might require an element of physicality. But then you've got this often overlooked element around health and well-being. And when you think about when you start to recognise that the health and well-being plays an aspect in there, I'm unhealthy, my well-being isn't in the best place, and now that's affecting my mindset of how I think about things, how I feel about things, and how I react to things, and now that's impacting my skills and knowledge. So these are some key components. We then get on to this idea about accreditation. Have I got it right? Yes. We get on to accreditation. That's my B grade in French. It is often used as a proxy, as a heuristic for other things. If you think about the decisions that you make about hiring, for example, you might look at a Russell Group education and go, I'm going to use that as a heuristic for ability rather than something else. We use this with the particular licenses. So if someone flies a plane, then clearly they're going to have these licenses and they're going to have these safe to practice. That's a smaller element of the accreditation aspect. It's more about the proxies, and this is used quite heavily in organisations. This is all the mandatory training that you still go, well, they did the mandatory training, I'm not understanding how they can't do X. It is used a lot as a heuristic in organisations. So this is why it's a key component to understanding capability of, but they've been trained, so why can't they do? And then this is the final bit that most people forget about. And certainly the organisation forgets about a lot, because they think capability is all about people, and it isn't. It exists solely in the construct of the organisation. And when you think about how all these things connect together, we recognise that you could be in an organisation where the environment is going to have a significant impact on you and your ability to do a whole lot of other things. One of the things that this has done is, and this connects into digitisation, but also AI, is that environment has now made knowledge far less important. As a workforce planning person, you end up touching a whole load of data. Quick show of hands. Who uses Google to work out how to use Excel? Okay. That's because the environment, the availability of knowledge, the availability of information means that I no longer need to know it. 20 years ago, I would need to know how to do all these things. Now, whether it is Excel, whether it is a video that allows me to break another part of my house, all of these things are information that means that knowledge becomes less valuable in an organisation. But you'd also recognise how the impact of that has got an impact on, if you've got an organisation where you've got, think about when you've had a bad boss, and you could have that bad boss who then impacts your mindset, who's impacting your well-being, who impacts your skills and your knowledge. But just think about the opposite end of that when you've worked as part of an amazing team and actually you're able to deliver more and create more value than actually on paper your skills and knowledge would suggest that you're able to. So this is why it's so important that all these things come together. So when we think about this in terms of your supply, you're thinking about exactly the same things in terms of your demand. Your demand is what is it that you need now and in the future. So the same time frame you were thinking, what have I got and what will I have, you're thinking about what is it that I need and how is that going to change? Are we talking the same? It's important that we talk the same language. We still talk about this capability. We still talk about the 7 rights. And then the gap analysis is, what is the difference between the two? What is the difference between what I need and what I have and what I'm going to have? And that gap between the two is all pain. It's all risk. And it's not necessarily the right thing that you have to close every element of that. The organisation is there to take that risk. What's really important from your perspective is framing it in terms of what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and what is that problem statement. Remember, this is all about workforce planning to create business outcomes. So unless you're able to frame something, frame a gap between what you have and what you need in terms of a business problem, you're going to struggle to get any form of funding to make that change. I won't cover it here, but the thing that I see a lot of why HR functions can't get things off the ground is that they attach HR value to particular initiatives. So the amount of organisations that I've seen struggle with things around diversity, for example, because they go, well, we just need to be more diverse. But why? Just to be more diverse. And HR struggles to have that. Whereas when you're able to frame things in terms of these are particular business problems, because as a business we've already decided that we believe that greater parity is the right thing to do, or here is a particular specific reason why in this group is going to be beneficial, people are going to struggle. So things like employee engagement, you've seen these things yourself, of when value is attached to a thing without it being attached to the business, you struggle to get traction. So framing your gap analysis in that way is absolutely key. Then you're into the action planning. 2 key components of the action planning. So these are the 7 Bs. The first component is demand optimization. Spent 15 years in the army. I have moved house an awful lot. And one of the things that I did in moving house that you have all done is at the point of moving, I've taken lots of trips to the tip and the recycling centre. Why have I done that? Because over time, we accumulate a whole load of stuff that we no longer need. However, as people who spend a whole lot of time in talent acquisition, how often, rather than someone trying to work out how they can optimize the demand, they just come traipsing into talent acquisition and say, I need more of X. So before we put our most valuable resource of people, of human time and effort and engagement into work, balance, optimize your workforce, but understand where you can use technology to reduce the need for people doing those things. Because when you put people in your work, you want it to be something meaningful for them. This is when Gemma talks about the real impact you can have on people. When you get it right, people can feel it. When you get it wrong, people are doing jobs that they know are a waste of time. People are spending half their time doing a report that A, no one reads, and B, the computers could do in half the time. And it's only then that we then get into the rest of them: buy, build, borrow, bind, and bounce. Hiring people in, learning and development, bringing them in on a temporary basis, retaining them, moving them around, or, if needs be, out of the organisation. Everything that you do to your workforce sits inside these 7 Bs. And once that's complete, then you get into deliver. And this is the key bit I'll leave you with in terms of what is agile planning, what is agile workforce planning, and what isn't it. Traditional workforce planning is a line. It's a line of activity that ends with you creating a workforce plan. Ta-da, my work here is done. Agile workforce planning, the last thing we do, I said the whole point is this is about the workforce. We take the plan, we deliver it. We deliver that plan, we monitor it, we revisit the assumptions that we've made on it, and it's a cycle. So as we deliver this workforce, we create for ourselves a new baseline, and therefore, rather than strategic workforce planning or any form of workforce planning being done as a one-off activity where everyone rides off into the sunset, it is an ongoing cycle of business activity that continues to deliver value. That allows us to do things like focus on one particular area of the organisation and start small, knowing that we can take whatever imperfect data we've got and iterate that plan as the data improves and incrementally involve more parts of the organisation and different segments of the workforce in order to be able to create effort. I think that is me. Thank you very much.